Okay, so we had previously talked about arc and angle measures and how to find those, and there was 3 different types. Today we're going to talk about segment lengths, and there's still 3 different types where the intersection happens on the inside, and then there's intersection happening on the outside, but they look a little differently. In type 2, we have 2 secants coming together to form an intersection on the outside. And in type 3, we have an intersecting secant and tangent on the outside. Okay, so we have 3 different types. We're going to find the segment lengths in these problems. So in the first, where you have 2 intersecting chords on the inside of the circle, what you're going to do is you're going to take the pieces on just one segment. You're going to pick one segment. I'm going to pick this one to work with first. And you're going to take each of those pieces and you're going to multiply them together. So A times B. And you're going to set that equal to the other piece, the other segment, the other chord. You're going to take each part of that chord and you're going to multiply it together. So C times D. And then you can solve from there. You'll actually have numbers and equations to plug in for those letters. So type 2, where you have a secant here and another secant. You're going to start with one. I'm going to pick this top one to work with first. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the piece on the outside, A, you're going to multiply it by itself plus the piece on the inside. And that's the same way you're going to set up the other secant. You're going to start with the outside piece, C, multiply it by itself plus the inner piece, which is D. And then type 3, you have a tangent right here. You're going to start with that tangent. You're going to take that tangent piece, which is A, and you're going to actually square it. You're going to multiply it by itself. And you're going to set that equal to, like the setup in the last type, you're going to take B times itself plus C. Okay. So these are the 3 types of problems, and we're going to solve each type of problem. So let's look at a couple. Let's look at number 1. It tells us to solve for x. This is a type 1 problem, so I'm going to write that here. This is type 1. I'm just going to pick a piece to work with first. I'm going to pick this piece. It doesn't matter which one you start with. And I'm going to multiply each piece of that chord to each other. So 10 times x. And that's going to equal, I'm going to pick the other chord and I'm going to multiply it. So 14 times 15. So I have 10x equals 210 when you multiply. Then if you divide, x is going to be 21. Okay. So let's look at number 2. Pick a piece to start with. I'm going to pick this piece BD, and I'm going to multiply it. So I'm going to take 4 times 5x minus 1. And I'm going to set that equal to the other piece multiplied by itself, 6 times 6. So I've got to distribute here. So I'm going to have 20x minus 4 equals 36. I'm going to add 4. So I have 20x equals 40. And divide. So x is 2. But it asked for BD. So it asked for this whole piece here. So I'm going to take 4 plus 5 times 2 minus 1, which is going to give me 13. Make sure you solve for what it asked for. Okay. So let's see. Let's look at number 3. So pick a piece to start with. I'm going to pick this that has the 27 and the x plus 5, and I'm going to multiply. So 27 times x plus 5. I'm going to set that equal to, I've got to multiply the other piece, 24 times x plus 7. So I'm going to end up having to distribute on both sides. So I'm going to end up with 27x plus 135 equals 24x plus 168. So I'm going to move my x's over. I'm going to move this 24x over by subtracting, and I get 3x. Next, I want to move the 135 over, and I'll get 33. And then if I divide, I get 11. And all this problem asked for was x. Okay, let's look at number 5. This is a type 2 problem, so I'm going to solve this a little differently. This is type 2. So what you're going to do is pick a piece to start with. It doesn't matter which piece. I'm going to pick this one. And you've got to start with the outer piece of that secant line. So I'm going to start with 9. I got to multiply it by itself plus the inner piece, which is x. And I do the same type setup on the other side. I'm going to take 8, which is the outer piece, multiply it by itself plus the inner piece, which is 19. So over here I've got to distribute because I have an x involved. So if I distribute, I have 81 plus 9x. But over here I can just plug all of that into my calculator all at once. And if I do that, I'll get 216. And then I can subtract the 81 from both sides. And I'll get 135. And I can divide and get 15. Okay, so let's go ahead and flip it over. Let's look at the back whenever you're ready. So let's look at a couple more problems together. Let's look at number 7. I'm going to just start with any piece I feel like. I'm going to start with this 8 and the 3x plus 4. So I'm going to start with the outer piece, multiply it by itself, plus the inner piece. Same type setup for the next. I have to take the outer piece, which is 7, multiply it by itself, which is 7, plus the inner piece, which is 5x plus 2. So before I distribute, I want to combine my like terms within the parentheses. So I'm going to have 8 times 3x plus 12 equals 7 times 5x plus 9. And now I'm going to go ahead and distribute. So I'd have 24x plus 96 equals 35x plus 63. So I'm going to move my 24x over by subtraction. I'll get 11x. I want to move that 63 over. I'm going to end up with 33. And then I have to divide, which is going to give me 3. Okay. So let's go on to number 9. So number 9 is a type 3 problem where you have a secant and a tangent involved. So I am going to just start. It doesn't matter which one you start with. I'm going to start with this one, with the 18 and the x. I'm going to set it up like we were the previous problem. Start with the outer piece, multiply it by itself, plus the inner piece. Set that equal to the tangent. It's got to be squared because it's only one piece. There's only one piece of that tangent, so I'm going to square it. So I'm going to take the 18 and I'm going to distribute it. I'm going to have 324 plus 18x, and that is going to equal 576. So I've got to take that 576 and I've got to subtract the 324. I've got to get rid of the 324. So I'm going to have 18x equals 252. And then the last step is to divide by 18. And there you have it. Okay, let's look at number 11. So this time around I'm just going to start with this tangent line. So that tangent line is only made up of one piece, so you got to take it and you got to square it. And then on the other side you've got to take the outer piece, 27, multiply it by itself plus the inner piece. So let's figure out what this is by plugging it in. 27 times 27 plus 21. So I have x squared equals 1,296. So how do you get rid of a square root? You should take, I'm sorry, how do you get rid of a squared? You should take the square root. Sorry, I gave away the answer there. So if you take the square root, you should get 36. So let's look at number 12 then. I'm going to start with the tangent line this time again. I've got to take this 3x and I've got to square it. But not only do I have to square the x, I have to square the 3 as well. And then the setup for the other side, I have to start with the outer piece, multiply it by itself, plus the inner. So 3 squared is 9, and then x squared is just x squared. Then over here, I'm going to take 9 times 9 plus 16. It's going to give me 225. So before I can take the square root, I have to divide by 9. So I have x squared equals 25. And my last step is to take the square root. So x should give me 5. Okay, let's get into a few harder problems. Alright, let's look at number 13. So on this one, this is a type 1 problem. So think back to type 1. I'm just going to pick this side to work with first. And I'm going to multiply those together. I'm going to have x plus 6 times x minus 1. I'm going to set that equal to the other side multiplied together. 12 times 10. So remember, the whole reason why we reviewed over those algebra problems is for problems like these where you have to use FOIL. So don't forget about FOIL. Go ahead and FOIL it out. First, outer, inner, last. So x times x will give me x squared. X times negative 1 will give me negative x. 6 times x will give me 6x. And 6 times negative 1 will give me negative 6. Then on the other side, 12 times 10 is 120. Okay, combine your like terms. You're going to have x squared plus 5x minus 6 equals 120. I'm going to move this over so that I can solve. I'm going to have x squared plus 5x minus 126 equals 0. Okay, you can do quadratic equation if you would like, or you can factor this. I personally feel like factoring is a lot quicker, so I'm going to factor this problem. So remember in your calculator the way that you can look up the factors of a number. Remember that I'm looking for factors of 126 that subtract to give me a positive 5. So I'm going to go into y equals. I'm going to type in 126 divided by x. And I'm going to hit second graph. So these will give me a list. I'm ignoring the decimals. I'm thinking of factors that will subtract to give me 5. 2 and 63 will not. 3 and 42 will not. 6 and 21 will not. 7 and 18 will not. But what about 9 and 14? Will they subtract to give me 5? They should. So the factors of 126 that subtract to give you 5 should be 14 minus 9. Those are the two factors. So your first factor should be x plus 14. Your second factor should be x minus 9, and those should still equal 0. Now, since these are still in factored form, that's not your answer yet. So there's one more step to this problem. These factors actually individually equal 0. So technically here, we're going to go back up here. I'm just going to write with a different color so that you can see this work a little differently. You're going to take x plus 14 and you're going to set it equal to 0. And you're going to solve for the factor. So in order to solve this, you have to subtract 14. So x would equal negative 14. Now think about that. If you plugged negative 14 in, you'd have negative 14 minus 1, you'd get negative 15 for a segment in a circle. It's not possible. You cannot have a negative number. So that answer is automatically out. So now this, we're going to set this factor equal to 0. X minus 9 equals 0. You're going to take the 9 and you're going to add it to the other side. So x will equal a positive 9. That is your answer. A lot of work, I know, but it's really not too bad as long as you catch the hang of it. Okay, I'll give you a couple minutes to look over that problem. Make sure you have it written down. Okay, let's look at number 14. This is a type 2 problem. So start with whatever side you want. I'm going to start with the x and the 5. I'm going to start with the outer, multiply it by itself plus the inner, and the same type problem on the other side. The outer times itself plus the inner. I'm going to distribute on the left hand side, so I'll end up with x squared plus 5x. And over here, if I distribute 4 times 4 plus 2, it's going to be 24. I want to move everything over to the left-hand side. So I have x squared plus 5x minus 24 equals 0. So let's think about factors of 24 that subtract to give me a positive 5. So I have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8. What about those two? Will they subtract to give you 5? Should be 8 minus 3, and that will give you 5, right? So my factors here are positive 8 and negative 3. And then if I solve them, all that happens really is that your sign changes. So x will equal a negative 8 and x will equal a positive 3. But you know that this one cannot work. You can't have a negative segment. So x is 3. Okay, let's work a couple more. I want you to get plenty of practice seeing this so that when you start your homework, it's not too bad. So let's look at number 15. This is type 2 again. I'm going to start with this segment that has x involved. I'm going to take x times itself plus the inner, which is 15, equals the other piece is going to be 5.5 times itself plus the inner, 22.5. So I'm going to distribute. I'm going to have x squared plus 15x. I'm going to plug all of this into my calculator. 5.5 times 5.5 plus 22.5. And I end up with 154. So I'm going to move that over. So I'm thinking of factors of 154 that subtract to give me 15. I'm going to use my calculator again. Remember, go to y equals. Type in 154 divided by x. I'm going to go second graph. thinking of factors that will subtract to give me 15. I'm skipping all the decimals. What about 22 and 7? Will those subtract to give you 15? They should. So 22 minus 7. So x plus 22, x minus 7 equals 0. So when you solve them like we did up here, you get x equals negative 22 and x equals positive 7. You know the negative can't work, so it's going to be just the positive. Okay, let's work one more like that. Number 16. I'm going to start with this value here. This is a type 3 problem. I'm going to start with this. I've got to square it because it's all by itself. So x plus 5 squared. And that's going to equal, I'm going to take the outer 12 times itself plus the inner. However, this right here is not just as simple as squaring x and then squaring 5. Remember, you have to FOIL it out. I'm going to do that down here. X plus 5 times x plus 5. So first would be x squared, outer would be 5x, inner would be 5x, and last would be 25. And when I combine my like terms, I have x squared plus 10x plus 25. So I'm going to write that here. X squared plus 10x plus 25. I'm going to calculate 12 times itself plus 15. And that's going to give me 324. So I'm going to move that over by subtracting. 25 minus 324. So I have x squared plus 10x minus 299 equals 0. So I'm going to use my calculator again to find the factors of 299 that subtract to give me 10. So 299 divided by x, second graph. Skipping all the decimals, there's quite a few there. What about 13 and 23? Those will subtract to give me 10. So 23 minus 13. So I'm going to have x plus 23 and x minus 13. That's going to be equal to 0. Once you start solving it, you get negative 23 and a positive 13. So that's got to be the answer. This cannot. Okay, so any problems that we did not finish on this notes page, I want you to finish first, and then I want you to move on to homework 7 and go ahead and get started on it.